Back in 2014, I single-handedly evacuated the Canadian embassy out of Libya, 18 military and 4 diplomats. If I continued with that momentum and taking those risks, I would either be dead or I wouldn't have a family to come back to. I don't need a scientist to tell me that I feel good when I'm physically active. I had to send the medic home on day 13 because he was bullying the documentary team. And you're doing a mental health campaign and you've got bullying going on behind the scenes. My wife rang me and then told me that we've been kindly invited to Prince Harry and Meghan's wedding. I said, well, that's good. She goes, no, you don't realize for you to now be finished, you need to be finished by day 102. So going into that phone call, I was 14 days ahead. 10 minutes later, I'm now a day behind. Alana got awarded the MBE from King Charles for her services to human trafficking and mental health. We got assisted 1,200 in Afghanistan. Last year, I got over 200 Americans out of Israel. Hollywood doesn't help matters. I call it the biceps, the bullets, and the bombs.
This is Sparta!
Welcome back to Spartan Leadership. I'm your host, Josh Kosnick, and welcome to an inspirational and impactful show. We are a leader-to-leader focused podcast, and if this is your first time here, welcome. If you're watching from YouTube land, listening on Spotify, Apple, we are welcoming all of you here to have as much impact as possible. And today we got a special guest, Dean Stott. Let me give a brief introduction to this incredible man because you guys are in for a treat today. We got a lot of leaders that listen in on this podcast, and I know you're going to get a lot of inspiration and practical takeaways along the way with our conversation today. So Dean Stott, MBE, a man whose life is marked by resilience, courage, and relentless pursuit of purpose. Dean, a former member of the elite British Special Forces Special Boat Service. That's a mouthful, by the way, Dean. They could have shortened that up. He's taken on missions that most people couldn't imagine, from evacuating diplomats in war zones to setting world records on a 14,000-mile bike journey, which we'll get into today. Dean's story is one of overcoming and excelling. His journey from the military to philanthropy, if I could speak words today, and mental health advocacy shows the power of a strong mindset and a clear mission. We will dive into his upbringing, career, and lessons he's learned along the way. Dean, welcome to the show, brother.
Thank you for having me, Adam.
We're excited to dive right in because you've got so much wisdom and just throughout your life have done so much at a young age. We're around the same age. I looked that up, and it's been incredible to just see. And I've heard you on other podcasts, and I can't wait for the Spartan audience to hear your wisdom today. So my first question and thought was, so I've had the privilege of learning a lot about the Special Forces community here in America. And I just, I know very little about the UK's structure and the military over there and how that is. But tell us a little bit about your upbringing and then go into what was the impetus or motivation to go down that path.
Yeah, so I was born into a military family. My father was a military man. He did 22 years in the Royal Engineers. But my father was almost like, he's like the Ted Lasso of the military. He was a soccer manager, player, and coach. So I wouldn't really see him in a uniform. His uniform was a tracksuit, a pair of soccer boots, and that was it. So I didn't really have much knowledge about the military, especially the special forces side. And my father did his 22 years, and I always wanted to be a fireman. And that was my ambition. But finished school, went to college, and went down surfing. I've surfed since a young boy, and it's no reason why I'm not here in California, just because of the surf. But I finished college. I went to college, and I was about 17 years old, and I ended up going surfing for 2 weeks. Ended up being 6 months, and my father, long before the mobile phone, we're talking 1994 now. My father then came looking for me and found me working in a surf shop, and told me that I'd ruined my education and what was I going to do with my life. And so for me, I again wanted to be a fireman. I knew that I was never going to get in at the age of 18 because back in 1993 it was a huge recession. There were like 2,000 applications for one role. So I thought, well, if I join the military, get some discipline, it will help my resume. So I told my father I'll join the military, and he told me I'd last 2 minutes. It wasn't the the warm, comforting words I expected from him. But that was my drive and motivation to sort of prove him wrong. I joined the military at the age of 17 and a half. By the age of 21, I was airborne commando diver PTI. I'd learned and grown mentally and physically. When I did join, I was about 130 pounds and about 5'7". And about 18 months later, I was nearly 200 pounds and 5'11". So not only was I growing physically, I was growing mentally as well. And that's when things like special forces start coming into my periphery.
So tell us about the SBS, because again,
Mm.
admittedly, I know a lot about the SEAL community here. I've gotten the privilege to become friends with those guys, some of the Rangers, the Green Berets,
Yeah.
and even Air Force Tactical. I got a good friend in that. And just what is the SBS, and how does that parlay to some of the things we know here in America?
So the equivalent for the SBS here in America is SEAL Team 6 and Delta Force. So you have tiered special forces. So those that you've just spoke of, the SEALs, the Rangers, the Green Berets, are known as Tier 2 special forces. And for us in the UK, that's the Commandos, the Royal Marines, the Parachute Regiment. And I spent 8 years in Free Commander Brigade. But where I was slightly different, I came from an army background. So for me, the SAS, which is Delta Force equivalent, is normally my path. But I decided that I was going to go SBS, which primarily was always Royal Marines, 100%. But sort of broke the mold on that. But unlike here in the US, where SEAL Team 6 and Delta Force have their own special forces selection process, ours is joint. The SAS and the SBS is joint together. So yeah, that's the equivalent. I mean, you call them special mission units.
Yeah.
We in Tier 1 special forces.
Amazing. So you grew up with a kind of a knack or an inkling to serve, whether it be a firefighter or then joining the military. What were some of the greatest lessons? I'd love to ask all veterans this question, but what were some of the greatest military or values or principles that you gained from your military experience that you carry with you today?
I think for me, I was very fortunate in my military career to be a student, but also be an instructor as well. And when you talk about leadership, what I loved about the military is you came across so many different types of peers and leaders, those that were good and those that were bad. And so really, I was almost like a sponge. I was taking the good things from those leaders and obviously not using the bad stuff. But one of the things that I always take away, and I did it with my students, and even now today, I never asked of my students I couldn't do myself. I always led by example. I saw other instructors screaming and shouting at the students, and they just stood there. And so they weren't getting the respect that they needed. And so I actually got more out of my students if I was down in the mud and doing it with them, because they felt like if they did let me down, they would let me down personally rather than just an instructor. So that was one of my big takeaways, was always do as they. And then also another one I used was anticipation was worse than participation. And that can be in the military, could be in sport, could be in anything. A lot of people will overthink a challenge or a mission and just not do it. When actually, if you decide to take the leap and then complete it, then look back and realize it actually wasn't that bad. So they're my two main takeaways I still carry on today in life.
Well, that's really good, because you're talking about anticipation. That's where anxiety sets in.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. And the neuroscience tells us that we cannot tell the difference in our brains between excitement and anxiety. It's the story that we tell ourselves as to whether we're going to latch on to anxiety or excitement. So that anticipation versus participation, that's such a great point.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, no, it is a great point. And also I think in today's society as well, is people also comparing themselves to others. And they're like, well, I can't do it because I'm not him or her. And I'm just like, yeah, but don't worry about what they're doing, just worry about yourself. So a lot of people are already beaten beaten before they even take off, purely because they're trying to compare themselves to other people out there. And I've done, people have said that to me before, and I said, well, I'm not that person, you know what I mean? So, so that's a contributing factor as well, I think, to that anticipation.
And your first point, I totally agree with. I was giving you thumbs up as you were saying it, because I'm a leadership coach, and that's something as I grew my large business and was part of that one thing that's always resonated with me is I couldn't follow someone that hadn't done that themselves before, or wasn't at least willing to get down in the dirt, like you said, and do it with me. I just couldn't follow that type of leadership. I know others can, like there are coaches out there that are great coaches that have never done some stuff before that they're coaching on. I just couldn't follow that. So my leadership style was always, I'm going to do it with you, or I've already done it for, in that instance, like what you're trying to do, to be able to lead you down that path. Hey, don't step on that board right there. You know, that's a false trap, stuff of that nature, to be able to educate from someone that's been down that road before.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the reason for that as well is also, you get that mutual respect from your client and that you've done it before, but also they trust the process, that you've done it, and, when you've done it before, you've learned lessons from that. One of the things we have in the special forces, we call it as a hot debrief, what worked, what didn't work. And if you're going to do it again, what would you do differently? And that's the great thing about having done it before and teaching it, is because you can explain where your failings were and where things were right. And so, I think it's more about having that mutual respect and trust from them.
So you guys called it a hot debrief. I know here in the States, they call it AAR, after action review, but
Yeah.
very similar take.
Yeah. Or a wash up, I've heard as well. Yeah. We call it a hot
Yeah.
debrief. Yeah. And we used to do it literally as soon as we landed or whatever we'd done. We wouldn't wait till the next day, because the good thing about the hot debrief is it's still fresh in your mind. And so that's when we were getting all the natural feedback from the team. So before we'd even clean the weapons, have a shower, have food or whatever, it was literally the hot debrief was first, what worked, what didn't work, and what would we do differently next time. And then the following day would then have more of a full debrief. But yeah.
It reminds me of my football days, because we'd have a hot debrief right in the locker room. And then the next day we're going into film study to really assess what we did wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. Very similar. Yeah. Very similar. Very similar.
So then you didn't retire by choice. You had a major injury that happened. Walk us through that.
Yeah, so I was on pre-deployment training to go back out to Afghanistan, and I was doing a Halo jump, which is a high altitude, high opening. So unlike skydiving, which is Halo, you're still attached to the aircraft, and you jump out the aircraft at the tailgate at 15,000 feet. The parachute is still attached on a static line to the aircraft, and so opens it for you. And then you can travel up to 30 minutes or 50 kilometers in the air to the target area. So it's just a method of insertion. And we've done so many jumps of these. And I think it was like the third or fourth jump of the day. And as I exited the aircraft, I did my compulsory count. And then I was looking in the wrong direction. I was actually looking up towards my foot, which was caught in the line above my head. So I was trying to clear my leg in time, because I know that the parachute's soon to be deployed. And I couldn't clear it in time. Pulled my leg over my head and to my right, but thankfully my heel did clear from the line. Otherwise it could have taken my leg completely off. But I'd never felt pain like it before. Straight away I knew that there was something wrong, but I also had to try and land this as well. I also had to still get to the drop zone, but I landed it perfect, landed it one-legged. But the damage sustained ended my career. I tore my ACL, my MCL, my lateral meniscus in my knee, but also my hamstring, my calf, and my quadricep. So normally you can tear an ACL or an MCL and your muscles will be able to support that. But all those muscles had gone as well. So after 16 years in the military, I was told, thank you for your service. It's time to leave.
Yeah. Before that's such a hard transition too. I know I will get into that in a second. I just want everyone to really grasp what they just heard there. So going back to my football days again as well, and we watched the NFL on Sundays, players are carted off the field with a torn ACL, torn MCL, oftentimes.
Yeah.
Dean just stated he landed a high altitude jump on one leg. I just want everyone to appreciate the amazing story you just told before I ask you about that. But when your career ends that abruptly, there's a lot of mental anguish that goes with that. For those that have been in, whether it's military service, a professional sport, or anything that a business or opportunities just ripped away from you like that. There's a lot of grief and stuff that goes along with that. How was that for you in that transition?
At the time, I didn't really notice it. now on reflection, and you speak to my wife, I was going through what was known as an identity crisis. And it's very common for those in the military or even in the sporting world. There's so many synergies there that you've spent your career, wanting to be the best, and then you're finally there. And then all of a sudden, an injury sort of changes course of direction of you and your life, So I got to where I had in the military because of my physical robustness. I now couldn't even run 50 meters without my knee giving way. My wife was also 8 months pregnant with our first child. And so for me, I was then worried about how am I going to be able to support my family? Is there any work out there? And so that was really compiling that identity crisis. In the military, I knew what I was doing for the next 2 years, literally for the next 2 years to, what is now my role within society. Thankfully for me, my wife is very entrepreneurial. When I met her, she was running 4 banks in Scotland. She set up our first private security company on her BlackBerry in about 30 minutes, So the stuff that I was worried about, that I hadn't been taught in the military, she knew. And so that transition was made slightly smoother for that. But yeah, I'd say I was going through an identity crisis. Within 48 hours, I was on my first private security job out in the Middle East. And so that sort of did ease some of the pressure. But yeah, it took a lot of time to really come to terms with the fact that I'd left the Special Forces, probably about 5 years later, really.
Oh, that's interesting. So one of my great mentors, Ed Milet, says life happens for us, not to us.
Mm.
And in that instance, what did you find happened for you there with that severe injury and the career ending? What happened for you?
I always wanted to be in the military. I was what was known as a lifer. I didn't at the time see what was for me. It's only now on reflection, looking back, that it's opened up these great opportunities and the stuff that we're doing now. And I've learned, I learned, looking back on reflection, I learned a lot in the military, but I was very limited to what I could learn there because of the roles that we were doing. Now being a civilian contractor and some of the stuff I've done, it has really opened my eyes to how big and really actually how small the Special Forces are. When you're in there, you're treated like a rock star. You are like the top within, doesn't worry about money or budget, aircraft, you get everything for you and you feel like you are the top of your game. And then when you come out, you realize actually the Special Forces is a very small cog in a very big machine. And it's actually not as important as you thought you were when you were in. So that's one of the things I've learned as well. But when I was in, it's like, no, we are, at the top of our game. So, but looking back, I've learned so much more about a corporate, about cultures, understanding demographics, politics, tribal influences, why we're there, why the military get involved, why the military can't get involved for certain reasons. So, but that wasn't instantaneous. That was literally over the last 13 years.
Did you get more time with your family?
I didn't initially. And when I mentioned to you earlier, it took me 5 years to realize that I'd left the forces. I was trying to, so back in 2014, I single-handedly evacuated the Canadian embassy out of Libya, 18 military and 4 diplomats. I found a niche within the security industry to do crisis management and evacuation plans. But because of the panic when I left, if there's any work out there to help support the family, I was out the door all the time and really building up a great network and reputation. But I came back from that trip, and Alana, like I said, Alana and I worked together. She's very entrepreneurial. She had a property development business. We sat down that evening and she'd highlighted I'd only been home 21 days in a 365-day calendar. So actually I was home. Yeah, I was actually home less than I was when I was in the Special Forces. But I thought that she wanted me to be out to be earning money. And she's like, and she thought I wanted to be out deployed, when actually it was really just a bit of miscommunication. But what it was as well, I was trying to match that adrenaline rush when I was in the Special Forces without coming to terms with the fact that, you're no longer in there. I was doing these high profile missions, dangerous missions on my own, but then, they were very successful, which is great. But should something have gone wrong, I don't have my squadron of guys coming to get me. I don't have the UK government, supporting me. So, something had to change. Chapter 16 in my book is called Dead or Divorced. This was a conversation Alana and I were having that evening. If I continued with that momentum and taking those risks, I would either be dead or I wouldn't have a family to come back to. And so that was a big change in my life as well.
Yeah, I can imagine. And I understand a little bit about all that change while you are one track minded for so long.
Mm.
And then that ends and you're trying to build a career, that next chapter of your book, that next life, what that takes to build that up. And at the same time, come to grips with what was, that is definitely a hard. What I didn't find was, how long was it after the military career that you set off on the Pan American Trail?
So the conversation we just talked about was 2014. So yeah, it was about 3 years after the military. But in 2016 it was. Alana and I decided to take a sabbatical from the security industry, spend a bit more time with Alana and my daughter at the time. And so Alana was a property developer, but that whole period of time from leaving the military to then I was so fixated on work that I neglected my own physical and mental well-being. I'd take a TRX with me around and, maybe like do a few exercises there, but I wasn't doing any cardio. My injured leg now was 2 kilos or 5 pounds lighter than my good leg because of the muscle wastage. And so I just bought a push bike, a road bike off Amazon, and I would cycle to and from the office where me and Alana were working in Scotland. And it's about 8 miles there, 8 miles back. But just being physically active again, as in cardiovascular, I felt like there was a bit of a weight off my shoulders because I hadn't done any cardiovascular since being in the military. But you can imagine with my backstory, sat in these architects and planners meetings with Alana. We now had our second child, Tommy. He was born. And so I'm sat in the corner, like bottle feeding him. And I wasn't interested. And Alana could see that glaze over my eyes and said, you need to do something to keep yourself physically and mentally engaged. And we also, since leaving the military, we did a lot in the philanthropy space, especially around veteran mental health. And Alana also does a lot in the human trafficking space. And so it was about a month before my 40th birthday as well, while I'm sat in these planners meetings. And I said, look, I fancy doing a world record. I don't know what in. And Alana's like, well, what did you think you can do a world record in? And I said, well, cycling seems to be good, because it's not hurting my knee. And so Alana, I was thinking maybe east to west coast of Scotland, something a bit small. But Alana then found the world's longest road, which runs from southern Argentina to northern Alaska, the Pan American Highway, 14,000 miles, 14 countries and 2 continents. And so I said, yeah, that sounds good. So sounds quite arrogant. So having only cycled 20 miles, I applied for the world record, was longest road. And for me, I knew that mentally, I had I had the capacity. Endurance wise, I'd been tested before. And if it was and the sport wasn't going to hurt my knee, then, it's the perfect challenge for me. So yeah, I applied for the world record, and then Guinness came back 6 weeks later and said, you've been successful on your application. So sticking with the philanthropy side, we now had the challenge. I do a lot of work with a good friend of mine, was Prince Harry at the time. Him and I were on a JTAC course back in 2007, and him and I had worked together behind the scenes on a few other charity work. He would be guest on my table at a couple of the gala dinners. I had an intelligence fusion cell based in Mozambique and Tanzania, which had identified the smuggling routes for the ivory from Africa to Asia. So I would every 3 months go to the palace and sort of share that information to him. So I rang him up and I said, look, I'm going to cycle the world's longest road. What should we do it for? And him and his brother and Kate were just about to launch a mental health campaign called Heads Together. And so I'd seen firsthand in the military about mental health, but Heads Together was a collaboration of 11 mental health charities, everything from postnatal depression, young children, teenagers, adults, and veterans. And so I said, perfect. That's the perfect challenge for this. And so I got introduced to the Royal Foundation, who were sort of running with Heads Together. And then I sat down with them and they said, well, how much are you looking to raise? And so I came up, I said £1 million. I just gave them a big number because I wanted to keep them at the table. And then the second question was, what is the message you're trying to promote? And I hadn't really thought about a message at this point. I literally had a conversation with Harry. He's told me to come and speak to you guys. And I just sat there and I said, well, physical activity helps your mental state. And this was back in now 2016, 2017, actually. And they said, oh, no, you can't use that. I said, well, why not? And they said, because it's not been scientifically proven. I said, yeah, but that's fine. But I don't need a scientist to tell me that I feel good when I'm physically active. So I ignored them anyway and carried on, promoting that message. And now 2024 is very much recognized as a coping mechanism for mental health. So that's how we came up with the challenge and the campaign behind the bike ride.
So what was the amount of miles you actually trained, or what was the longest you did prior to doing that 14,000?
Prior to doing that 14,000, so I trained for a good year to that. Again, one of the great things about it is Alana was the campaign director. I generally believe that anyone can break world record if someone's looking after the business, the mortgage, the family, and all you got to do was train. So my biggest rides, they weren't that long really, about 120 miles. I was learning, in the earlier stages, I wasn't getting much. So I'd probably do one century ride. It's called 100-mile ride a week. I was getting a lot of strength and conditioning, bulking up my legs. But I was also looking at the countries that I was cycling through. I had everything from plus 47 degrees centigrade to minus 18 degrees and everything in between. So how could I replicate those cycling scenarios without actually taking a risk on the challenge? So I would go out to Dubai and do heat training. I'd train in altitude centers. And so, but yeah, probably my biggest rides were about 120 miles. It weren't that much. I did 1 week where I did consecutive 7 days. I did Land's End John O'Groats, which is the southern end of UK to the top of UK. But nothing was going to replicate what I was going to do. That Land's End John O'Groats, which is a huge bucket list in UK, was a training ride for me. And I never mean to sound arrogant, but it had to be a training ride because the Pan American Highway was 15 of them back to back, a 6.5 day pace.
Yeah, which is incredible. So he did this in under 100 days from the tip of Argentina to the tip of northern Alaska, which is just incredible to think about the span that is. What was the hardest part? Was it the actual cycling? Was it the climate? Was it the passing through the countries and customs? Was it the team members? What was the toughest part?
Yeah, there was a few things. So the world record was actually 117 days when I set off. In South America, we had everything from strong winds. I had food poisoning. I crashed the bike and everything else. But I think the hardest part for me was the first week. We started in Argentina. And the reason we started in Argentina, actually, when I was planning this project, I reached out to the other previous record holders and I asked them, I did the hot debrief for them. I said, what worked? What did work? And if you were going to do this again, what would you do differently? And all their answers were, their issues were all in South and Central America, be it languages, spares for the bikes, bureaucracy. And they all started in Alaska and finished in Argentina. So I thought, why take a gamble with the second half of the challenge? Why not address those issues early? So I started from Argentina. So that's one of the things I was proud of, is just because everyone went that way didn't mean it was the right route. But starting from southern Argentina, you got the strong winds. And by the end of the first week, I was 30 miles behind target, but I was still aiming for 110 days. So I was always ahead. And so from that point onwards, I was always ahead of the world record. So it wasn't really the challenge itself. One of the things that really jumped out was the support team. Now on reflection, I see other people doing challenges and they rotate their support team every 28 days, especially for endurance challenges, because they're fatigued, they're tired as well. But we were thinking how much money we can donate to the charity. So if we were going to do that, it meant there was flights and everything else. But yeah, the support team was an issue for me. When the challenge started, I took 10 days off the South America world record. And then this was starting to then really sort of explode in the public eye. They then wanted more credibility, more notice and things like that. Well, why is it Dean that's getting all the exposure, and so it's sort of managing egos I didn't really expect when I'm on a challenge. I had to send the medic home on day 13 because he was bullying the documentary team. And you're doing a mental health campaign and you've got bullying going on behind the scenes. And so things you wouldn't even think of. I'm thinking about the bike ride, other scenarios that we can encounter, and this just came in from the side. And so, yeah, it was just managing egos, which was quite difficult. But again, the second hardest thing for me was I got into North America on day 70 and I was 14 days ahead of the world record. So I'm like, perfect. I can take my foot off the gas. Yeah. We're in a friendly country. Everyone speaks my language. The culinary options are better. And then my wife rang me and then told me that we've been kindly invited to Prince Harry and Meghan's wedding. I said, well, that's good. She goes, no, you don't realize for you to now be finished, you need to be finished by day 102. So going into that phone call, I was 14 days ahead. 10 minutes later, I'm now a day behind. And so, yeah. So those sort of things, even though you're ahead of the world record so much, every time I was trying to hit my objective kept moving. And so I had to change the way that I cycled in North America. Down in South America, because of the security issues, we had to be off the road at night. But in North America, luxury wise, it was a bit more safer. And so I got to Lubbock the next day. We had 60-mile-an-hour winds and tornadoes. So I was grounded now for another 24 hours. And so I sort of had to make a plan in North America. There's an app called Windy TV, and it gives you the strength and directions of the winds for the next 2 weeks every hour. And so I had to cycle 340 miles in the next 36 hours to get out of Texas. And I was just playing chess with Mother Nature. So we had 17 days planned for North America. I cycled in 11 and a half days. So it's things that were out of my control.
Well, when you're on such a long journey, there's going to be lots out of your control. I want to touch back on the people for a moment, because it doesn't matter if it's family. It doesn't matter if it's your business and the employees that you have, or the support team that volunteered their time to be with you, and all of a sudden their egos get involved and it's kind of crazy to me. You're the one doing all the biking, and the documentary is about you, and you're doing all the fundraising because of your efforts on the bike, and there's people wanting more credit for being a supporter of that. It's just kind of funny, but it just goes to show that in almost all the businesses that I work with, it's usually not the marketing, the finance. It's typically the people. Cause the most issues.
Yeah. And actually when I came back from that and, it sort of really got exposed how bad it was on the challenge, there was other people I knew who were explorers, expeditionists, and they said, oh yeah, this is commonplace in the industry. I was like, well, no one told me prior to, because they were all volunteers, and because it was a mental health campaign, we thought it was, for the better good. But lessons learned going forward is have a contract in place, have NDAs in place. And I would, if I was to do it again, I would make sure that they were paid. There's no pro bono. So there's no, it's a business. At the end of the day, I was chatting to a young gentleman who's looking at doing this challenge, and his support team's his best friends. And I told him about my support team because, but my best friends. I said, yeah, your best friends now, but on day 48, when they're absolutely fatigued, and, that's when you need to have NDAs and contracts in place. But apparently it's commonplace in this industry, which is shocking, really.
Well, that crosses over to business as well, Dean, because if you go into business with your best friend, if you go into business with a family member, have the contracts, have the NDAs, have the attorneys do all the stuff beforehand, because I like to operate on faith-based and trust as well. That being said, as soon as money gets involved, all feelings change. Or if they have a financial stressor in their lives, or their wives put pressure on them, or they have a new baby come into play, everything changes. And you don't want to think that they're going to change, but they have their own pressures and their own ego and their own stuff. And it's just better to have those formalities in place before anything becomes an issue.
Yeah, no, very true. Very true.
So it's a great lesson. So the other thing I wanted to touch on is Alana is a saint. I mean, you think about just that. That's why I asked you about the timing of it, because, already to be married to a special forces operator is a tough proposition. Yes, they may know what they signed up for, but then for you to retire, go into not being home except for 300 40 some odd days the
Mm.
next year. And then for you to go on and take this challenge that's going to be 110 days or less, but you got it done
Yeah.
in less. But man, talk about Alana and the support and what that has meant to you.
Yeah, well, I think when people see me, I always, none of this, we wouldn't even be having this conversation if it wasn't for Alana. Alana picked me up from a dark place when I left the military. She's, as you touched on, she's very entrepreneurial. She's given up a lot for me to do the bike rides and to do everything else. But everything we do, we actually work together. We're business partners. We've been business partners from the start. So she understands the bigger picture. Things have changed slightly now. We know I'm not going away doing big challenges. We do everything together. But, when I met Alana, she's very philanthropical, always wants to give back, works a lot in the mental health space. She got, mental health space, and also the human trafficking space. When I met her, she wanted to get into security because there was a Haiti earthquake and a friend of hers was at an orphanage and there was a $5 bounty on her head. And so she needed security, but security comes at a cost. So she wanted to build up or be in a position that we could provide that pro bono. And that's where we are now. Alana got awarded the MBE from King Charles for her services to human trafficking and mental health. She has her own book called How to Ask for Money for business owners, whether it's in the philanthropical space or whether it's in the business space, because it's really interesting. So the relationship Alana and I have, I'm the extrovert. I'm the one who will open doors and chat to people fall in love with. But as you said earlier, I picked you up on, when you start talking about money, things start, communication starts to break down. And so for me, I don't do anything about the contracts. Alana does all that. Alana comes in. And so that's where we understand our strengths and weaknesses. And the reason for that is, I come from an environment in the special forces where when you're planning an operation in Afghanistan or Iraq and you need a UAV, you need aircraft, you need helicopters, you need a squadron of guys, you need this amount of ammunition, no one tells you what that costs. There's not a bottom line. There's no NDAs, there's no proposals, there's no RFIs. It's like, it's automatically done for you. So we're not used to being in the world of negotiation or business or contracts. And so when I left the military, I generally was like, oh, everyone's like the military. They look after each other. And Alana's like, no, this is a cutthroat. This is a cutthroat environment. And so she does all of that for me. So for us, it's understanding our strengths and our weaknesses. But her getting the MBE from King Charles was great because it was always me that was forward facing. Everyone was always Dean on the bike. It was always Dean, in doing the evacuations, when actually Alana was coordinating, planning everything behind the scenes.
Yeah. So it's great affirmation for her to receive that. That's amazing and well deserved.
Yeah.
So that's awesome. Lastly on that, what was the amount that you guys raised?
So we raised, at the time, it was at £930,000. I think with the exchange rate at the time, the US was about $1.4 million. It's probably now about $930,000 in the day. Yeah. So yeah, about $1.4 million back in the day, which again, the world record was amazing, but the amount of money that was raised, was huge. And like I said, Alana was the credit for that. She also, and every penny that raised went to the campaign, because Alana then managed to get me £500,000 sponsorship as a non-cyclist for me in the team. So, that book, How to Ask for Money, she has her own formula in there. I think it's called MAPS. Yeah, it's called MAPS. She has her own formula.
That's awesome. Well, everyone go pick up that book because it's needed. I think that's where people struggle the most in business, is closing that sale because they're afraid to ask for what they want, and which is oftentimes money.
Yeah, I think that's why she came up with, she did chat to, but we were chatting to a good friend who worked in finance, and we started talking about asking for money, because she said, oh, well, Dean doesn't like to talk about money in front of clients. And he's like, yeah, I hate asking for money. And she's like, you work in finance at one of the biggest companies. He said, no, I still feel uncomfortable. And so Alana's like, well, maybe I'll put a book together, and yeah, that's where the birth of the book came from.
No, that's awesome. So now you're in the entrepreneurial space and you're providing security all over the world. And what I've noticed recently, so I've held a couple political events here at my property over the past couple of weeks. And it's interesting that private security, like you guys really operate in the dark, but
Mm.
are really running sophisticated businesses for high profile people.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if you would touch on that a little bit about what it takes, because most of us, and even myself up until recently, and having conversations. So we just had Tulsi Gabbard in town, and I got to talk to her head of security for a long time because it's my property, and
Yeah.
I'm giving him a tour around and making so that he can button up everything to make sure that everything is
Mm.
protected to his standard. And we got into a lot of good conversations, and he was asking me about business, and I'm asking him about his world, which I know nothing about. So I got to imagine if I know nothing about it, and I'm just learning a little glimpse through
Mm.
my interactions. Enlighten us a little bit about what it takes to operate in that world that most of us know nothing about.
Yeah, so the security industry, when I tell people I'm in the security industry, especially my bald head, tattoos and muscles, they think you're a doorman from the local nightclub. The security industry is so diverse. It's everything from, Tulsi's head of protection, close protection, there's surveillance, there's cyber security, there's crisis management, there's maritime security. It's a huge, huge beast. So for me, where we've sort of done really well was the crisis management and evacuation plans. We got help assisted 1,200 in Afghanistan. Last year, I got over 200 Americans out of Israel. And one of the reasons we were actually successful there is the fact that we're not a multi-billion pound organization. We're a husband-wife business. And I built up a great network over the years of subject matter experts from certain regions around the world. And so when I get a task come in, I don't use the same team. I use the experts from those regions, because there's no point in me taking 6 Americans to go into Mexico City. Use the Mexicans because they know their country. And so that's where we've been slightly different in the fact that we use locals as much as possible. About 75% of the work is down to the local. But where I was going with that one is the fact we're nimble. We don't need to get approval for the board. We don't need to consolidate or get together teams. And we can make that decision straight away. But where we've been successful in the security industry is, everyone sees special forces and Hollywood doesn't help matters. I call it the biceps, the bullets and the bombs. They see all the offensive action, the guns and everything else. That's 25% of what we do in the special forces. 50% of what we do in the tier 1 special forces is support and influence. It's hearts and minds. It's being embedded with locals, working undercover, understanding the demographics, the politics and the tribal influences. And so that's where we've been successful in the industries. We haven't tried to come on these projects and bring our own teams and try to bully our way through. We've really understood what's going on the ground, who are the best people for that job, and sort of go from there. But security here in the US, like Tulsi's head of security, what he needs to be worried about is very different from if he was in Angola or if he was in Brazil. So they're very much country specific, country threats as well. And so that's where we really excelled. And I'm now in a position where we're more on the educational side. We work with family office security. We're now looking at putting security courses out, bodyguard mindset. We're not teaching people to be close protection officers, but this is what we think about when we're deployed or when we're driving as well. So it really depends where you are in the world to what the threat is. And so that's where majority of our work is overseas. Here in the US, I tend to use ex-law enforcement guys because they know the US, they know that state law. I always say it's working in 50 countries here because 50 different states.
Yep.
But, deployment wise, it's all the soft guys because they understand the cultural awareness of these countries as well and things like that. So each case or each security project is very unique in itself. But that's probably where we sort of specialize. We will make a bespoke team for that project.
And so I got to imagine, just based on how you're describing this requires a huge amount of trust.
Yeah.
And building trust. And so I think this is an applicable question to really every facet. Most people aren't going to be in security. Most people aren't going to deal with threats that you've dealt with. But how do you go about, but what everyone does deal with is trust and trust issues. So how do you go about building trust and knowing who to trust in your world?
Yeah. So it's hard because you can get let down. But for me, I always go with my gut. So Alana says my USP is I work on my own. If I go to Somalia, Libya, Yemen, Syria, I go on my own. The reason I go on my own isn't because I want to be more sneaky. I can get a sense straight away of the atmospherics or when I'm dealing with people. I mean, also I'm not taking a team that could potentially compromise or let me down as well. So for me, I tend to go in and I build up those relationships from the ground. I don't email people. A perfect example of that, I was in Mogadishu and this guy, we sat down, I had food with him and his family, sat on the floor, and we shared bread and had a coffee. And he said, I get emails a dozen a day from private security companies, all offering the same services, from New York, from London, Dubai. And he said, but you've come here and you've actually seen, you've come to our country, you've sensed the atmospherics. And so for me, it's all about reputation. And that's where I start is I built up this reputation with these people from all these countries over the last 13 years. And so some have let me down and some haven't. And so, but there are occasions, for example, I'll give you a good example. Israel, October the 7th, I was in Disneyland with my wife. October the 8th in the evening, I'm landing in Tel Aviv. I've never been to Israel before. And so literally I had to make a couple of phone calls and trust that those people on the other end were going to help me deliver. And they did. So, there's an element of just going with your gut.
So it seems like you've become an expert in reading people because it's not just a gut thing.
No.
Yes, you have to go with your gut, but there's probably a degree of question asking and being able to read someone's body language, words, stuff of that nature. Is there any light you can shed on that, on what you've learned over the past 20, 25 years of dealing with people of all different countries?
I think Alana says my USP is I can make friends with anyone, whether you're a homeless boy on the street or a member of the royal family. I'll talk to you exactly the same. I don't speak to anyone in any different manner. When I say I go in and I openly trust them, I'm not naive to think there isn't a threat. And I probably made, or I will have made plans in place anyway, should something go wrong. But no, I can't tell you what it specifically is. I just think it's, Alana said people tend to feel a safe aura from me, and I can also get that from them as well. It's just a gut feeling. If I'm not happy with something, I'll just pull back. But like I said, if I'm on my own, I'm not then the rest of my team aren't at threat as well.
Yeah.
I've taken risk myself.
No, that's good to note. I was just wondering there because we all deal with trust issues in business, in life, and you've had to trust people at a very high degree in very high risk situations. Just something I thought I'd key in on. I want to go back to the mental health advocacy for a moment. Is there anything that you've learned? Because I told you a little bit about my mental health advocacy, and my audience knows about my father-in-law's passing, and we're very open about that because we want to continue to breed more awareness and destigmatize this issue. What's been some of the key things that you've learned and been able to help in this cause over the years of being such an advocate for brain health, mental health?
Yeah. So for me, coming into the mental health world was the bike ride. I openly put my hands out. I didn't really know much about it going in before I started that bike ride. I'd seen it firsthand with some of the guys in the military. But one thing I have taken away from my time and knowledge and experience and working in this space is it doesn't discriminate. It doesn't matter what your background is or where you've come from. It affects everyone. You hear about successful or very rich people committing suicide, and people are, well, they had everything, but you just don't know what's going on in the background. One of the things recently I found out when I was in the UK was, and one of the things that upsets me is there's a lot of these mental health campaigns are specifically for the veterans. And it's like, everyone suffers with mental health, but 75 people don't aware of this actually, but 75% of veterans with PTSD is nothing to do with their time in the military. It's to do with their childhood. Everything starts from childhood, but it's because they're in the military, it's PTSD. So for me, my big takeaway was it doesn't discriminate. Everyone is affected in some form or manner, but it's those coping mechanisms, what you do with it. When I did this bike ride, for example, I said physical activity. The other options were communication, which was key, and then the others was pharmaceuticals, and I'd always try and avoid that as the latter. But communication and physical activity were my key ones. One thing a new space I've now entered is plant medicine since coming to the US, and that's really opened my eyes to how we can sort of tackle and help those with mental health. And what my big takeaway from that was, I was very much an advocate that physical activity helps your mental state. Now, having done the plant medicine, I realized that you're almost like a boiling water on a stove in a pan. The physical activity is taking the lid off of that and releasing the steam, which is great, but you're putting the lid back on, and so it's going to come back again. Since doing the plant medicine, I realized actually you're taking the whole pan off the flame and putting it to the side. It doesn't mean that mental health stuff's gone. It just means there's more coping mechanisms for it, or understanding, the issues. I'm very fortunate. I'd never had PTSD. I never had any addictions. I because of my work in the mental health space, I got approached by a couple of the veteran Heroic Hearts here in the US, which is a veteran plant medicine, said, would I be interested in doing it? And then my original reason for doing it was because I was talking about mental health and I was hearing about plant medicine. I thought, well, at least if I've experienced it, I can have a seat at the table. And then not realizing how much help I needed until I partaked in it. So I'm still learning a lot about mental health. Maybe in the earlier days, I was like, I was a bit more discriminatory. Is that, well, why have they got mental health? They haven't done this, this, and this. I now realize that everyone suffers in mental health in varying levels.
Yeah, and I can affirm what you're saying there. It's if my father-in-law, who anyone that met him would have never guessed, because he was the most generous, the most kind, the most compassionate person possible. And then you think about some of the comedians we lost, from Robin Williams to Chris Farley, who were so about making others joyful and laugh. Like, you just never know what's going on underneath some of these amazing people. So it is non-discriminatory. Which plant medicine did you partake in?
So originally I did, my first one was Ibogaine down in Mexico. I've then done Iboga and ayahuasca. So I've gone through them all now, but actually from each one, I got something different from it. And I'm still on that journey at the moment. But if you speak to my wife, Alana, compared to where I was, my first plant medicine was November 17 last year. And it's almost like night and day. Alana and I have a podcast called Behind the Scene Podcast, where we get famous people or celebrities or successful business people and get their partners on as well. And we had Marcus and Amber Capone, who run the Vets nonprofit on plant medicine. And she told me a story about how Marcus had done the Ibogaine and came back, and it was almost like he'd gone back 15 years. And so Alana sort of kicking my foot. And the reason for me, as I said, I didn't have PTSD or any addictions, and life was good. I just finished a Netflix show. We were in America. I thought life was good, but there was always these moments where I go from 0 to 100, like red mist. And, we've talked about some of the places I've operated. I'm actually at ease or more comfortable when I'm in those crisis environments. It's when I come back to the Western world and people are arguing about first world problems. That's what upsets me. There's someone beeping their horn on their car. There was an incident back in Scotland when I dropped my door off at nursery, and the guy's beeping his horn, just kept beeping it. And so I just pulled him out of the car and just dropped him. But then it cleared, it disappeared. And this would only happen maybe like 2 or 3 times a year. And so there was obviously an underlying problem there or issue. And so, it's not that you don't get angry anymore. Whereas before it was like a light switch, it was like 0 to 100. Now it's almost like a dimmer. And so, but I've been more present with the kids. A lot of people have said, what's Dean done differently? And so, I put that down to the plant medicine.
That's awesome, because a lot of people are, I think, because of lack of awareness, just scared of that topic. And what advice would you have of someone that's like either they don't believe in it because of their religion, or they're just scared of that topic in general because they've heard that you can change as a person? Well, and my response is like, well, that's kind of the point, but they're
Yeah.
scared. What would you say?
I think for me, like when I did mine, I didn't do any research. It's typical me. I just went straight in, I'll go in, but there are so many people talking about it. Elon Musk talks about it. Tony Robbins talks about it. It can help with trauma, but it can also help people in business as well. So for me, one of the takeaways I got from the plant medicine is don't promote it. It's not through promotion, it's through attraction. So people speak to people who've done the plant medicine, if you know anyone who's done plant medicine, and you will see the differences in them. And that's where we are at the moment. Is people, Alana and I have friends, and they're like, "What's happened to Dean?" And we haven't told him about it. And it's he's done this. So, but there is a lot of podcasts out there. There is a lot of research out there. I know for a fact that the special forces community, it's working with them. It's working with people with addiction, and it's natural. It's not synthetic. The only ones who are fighting against this are the pharmaceuticals, because they know it's having impact and
Positive impact.
Yeah. So for me, it's just, there's enough information out there, and go for it yourself. Interesting you said about religion wise. I did the Iboga, which was the truth medicine. It's the godfather of the plant medicine, originated from Gabon. And my shaman, she said to me that a lot of people who are religious don't like it because what their perception of the afterlife and what they actually see is two different things. And so, it's interesting. It's interesting. It takes you on a journey. Like I said, for me, going into that last year, I'd never done recreational drugs before, never even smoked before in my life, to then doing the 4 most powerful psychedelics as well now. But yeah.
Well, thanks for going there and being vulnerable with it, because I have not done that. I've done some other things like psilocybin, but I have friends that have gone down that path of ayahuasca, and probably a couple of the others that I didn't know about that you mentioned. And they've said it's just enlightening. It's changed their life, and they're so much more present with their loved ones, their kids in particular, and just appreciating the beauty of life more than the high stress, high paced type A alpha male type world that we typically live in.
Yeah. And I think for me, not only has it benefited me, it's benefited my relationship with my wife. I thought I was strong anyway. It's even stronger now. It's benefited the children. But yeah, as you said, you just appreciate life more. One of my big takeaways from the Iboga was, make every day your best day. Just make every day your best day. Don't get caught up. For me now, when I see things that would normally anger me, or I'd just ignore it. Just ignore it. And social media being one of them as well, actually. So it's not so much the plant medicine. Plant medicine's an important part. It's the integration afterwards. And so your mind, your brain is neuroplastic. It's basically getting rid of the old habits, and for the next 3 months taking in the new habits. So if you go straight onto social media and watch the news, and it's very toxic, that's now coming back into your life. So it almost gives you that baseline again.
Yeah, it breaks you free from that so that you can integrate more positive things, more positive neural pathways, because our brains are neuroplastic, as you said. So neuroscience is like one of those, like the one area, if I could say I nerd out in that. So glad you went there. Last topic I wanted to touch on, because I was thinking about this as I was doing my research on you, and I'm like, man, so if anything, God forbid, happened to Dean today, what a legacy you would have already left.
Yeah.
And I always think about this is, hopefully, God willing, you have a long life ahead of you. What's ahead of you? What's the legacy and the next chapter that you want to write?
So it's really interesting, actually, you say that, because I feel like I talk about evolutions in life. I have I see guys in the special forces who have been out now for like 15, 20 years talking about special forces, still resting on their laurels. And I'm like, that was an evolution in your life. What have you done since? So I always feel like in your life, you have these evolutions or chapters, as you've touched on. The special forces was great for me. I learned so much from that. That was an evolution. I took what I learned from that environment and then did that in the private security, which helped me on the bike ride and everything else. I feel like now I'm about to step into my next evolution. One of the interesting things, I was looking at doing more world record challenges, but the plant medicine had said, as you know, the plant medicine deals with ego, which is one of the big, and it said to me, well, why are you doing it? Who are you trying to prove to? And I was like, actually, that's a valid point. You know what I mean? So, for me now, I've had a great life and I've learned so much, and I now want to sort of be able to, as you said, should something happen tomorrow, be able to pass on that information so others are learning from it. So more getting into the coaching area, whether it's lifestyle coaching, whether it's mindset coaching with teams. We still do the security. The security is very easy now, but for me is almost like now being able to sort of share that information, what I've learned, and pass it on to, young entrepreneurs, successful business people, or teams as well. That's where I am at the moment, and more of a full-time job rather than the ad hoc for that's been good. We've now got our green card, so we now know that we're going to stay in America. So it's now forming a bit more stability for me and the family, because we've now launched the Blue Rose Foundation, which is to end human trafficking, and Alana's the CEO on that. So she's really going to be driving that forward. So for me is that I can now hopefully support her as she goes on her mission and everything else.
And that's probably a different topic we can have at a different day, because that's a passion of mine as well. I got a good friend, TJ Morris, who was on my podcast, and he started Caleb House, who builds houses for sex trafficking victims, and they actually do a lot more than that, where they're doing some extractions as well. But man, we'll have to talk about that at a different time. That being said, on the coaching side of things, let's connect further, because that's something I built over the last 3 years, and I have this beautiful property. If you ever want to use it for some of your programming, anything of that nature, we'd love to have you.
No, I'd love to. Like I said, there's so many great coaches out there, and I think it's just each coach, as you said, has different experiences. And I say you can't be experienced without experiences. So I just want to really take my experiences, what I've learned, whether it's in sport, special forces, private security, being a father and getting things wrong as a father, and getting things wrong as a husband, and just being able to share that, because people shouldn't be making the same mistakes. It's that hot debrief.
Yeah, that's what's so great about coaches, mentors, people in your life that have been down that road or been across that bridge, and be able to come back to you and say, hey, don't step on that board. That one's going to fall through. Yeah. Hey, take a bigger step here, smaller step here. Don't do that. Do this. It's getting that wisdom before you make the mistake is such a crucial life hack. And so few people have coaches. It seems like when you're in the coaching space, I'll tell you this, it seems like there's so many of us, but yet there's so many people to help. The market is endless. So it's incredible.
Amazing. No, but Josh, thank you so much. I appreciate that offer.
No, this has been an incredible episode. I know everyone's going to get a lot out of it. The last question I always ask people, and it could be on anything we touched on, or anything that's just on your heart, but what's an unpopular belief that you hold to be true that you believe most others disagree with?
You make your own luck. I think you make your own luck. That got said to me, and some people are like, no, some people are lucky. And I said, no, you make your own luck. That's my
I like it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't believe in being lucky.
No.
Finds when like hard work and preparation come together, it's like, that's when the luck tends to arrive.
Yeah. Yeah. No, a friend of mine once said to me, you make your own luck. Just as I was literally not long before I was a few months later, I then got injured. But yeah, no, I see people and they're always expecting the quick fix, or something will happen, or buy a lottery ticket. I said, no, you make your own luck. We all came into this at the same start point. Alana and I come from humble beginnings. And so, yeah, we made our own luck.
Yeah. Well, you have, and you're an incredible inspiration to me. And I know so many others. So this next chapter that you evolve into, I know you're going to inspire millions more. So it's been incredible. Spartans, you know what to do. Share this episode far and wide. Like Dean said, make today your best day. Remember, the good and great are the enemies of possible. Lead like a Spartan today.
This is Sparta!